Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Ashby, Director of the Under 2 Coalition Secretariat at the Climate Group, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to this Climate Week New York City event, Peas, Trees and 1.5 Degrees, Nature and Agriculture in the Climate Decade. For those of you who don't know us, the Under 2 Coalition is a global community of state and regional governments committed to ambitious climate action in line with the Paris Agreement. Our coalition includes over 260 governments around the world, and today we're going to hear from 3 of them. But we'll also have speakers from farmer representative groups, businesses, and other NGOs here with us today. As we all know, all sectors, and most importantly, local farmers and communities have a role to play in both facing the challenges of a changing climate for our food system, as well as unlocking the potential of the food, agriculture, and land use systems to be climate positive, capturing carbon while also protecting nature and biodiversity, providing for local, dignified livelihoods and safeguarding health and well-being. So thank you all for joining us. We're going to hear from speakers dialing in from all over the world, from India to the US in the first panel, from Italy to Uganda in the fireside chat, and from Peru to Brazil and Ecuador in our final panel focused on the Amazon. I'll be here as well, tuned in from the UK. I'm now happy to pass over to my colleague, Divya Sharma, Executive Director in India for the Climate Group, to kick off the first panel, discussing policy and innovation in agriculture and land use. Take it away, Divya.
Thank you, Tim. And thank you, Ashley, Jim, and Mudit, for joining us today at Climate Week NYC to discuss food and climate. We don't have much time. It's a small panel, so I'm going to dive straight into the panel. I want to start us off with a broader question for Jim from PepsiCo, first looking at the complete health of our planet. Jim, why is the concept of planetary boundaries critical to the success of businesses?
Thanks for the question, Divya. It's an important one. Planetary boundaries was not a phrase that many used or understood until recently, and it's critical that it becomes a part of our everyday language, much like climate change is. And simply put, planetary boundaries are the environmental limits within which humanity can safely operate now and for generations to come. And if we ignore these boundaries, we're going to face disastrous consequences for the health of the planet and, all of us, the people on it. Our Earth's temperature is one of those boundaries, and the impact of global warming, we're seeing now, it's already having a negative impact on global agriculture and the food system more broadly. Everything from reducing access to nutrition to hurting farmers' livelihoods. And the risks are there for all of us. I think they're pretty clear. And companies across the supply chain have a responsibility, we think, to operate within these planetary boundaries. And that's why this year PepsiCo has announced an ambitious set of goals across climate, agriculture, and water. And that's why we're strategically transforming our entire end-to-end business. Everything from how we source product and ingredients and make and sell our products in a more sustainable way to inspiring consumers through our brands and to make better choices for themselves and for the planet, and to supporting communities and improving livelihoods throughout our supply chain. We're really putting sustainability at the heart of how we create growth and value by operating within those planetary boundaries and inspiring positive change for the planet and for all the people. We call this the new approach PepsiCo Positive. And it's, we think, one of the greatest opportunities that our company has ever had to improve the well-being of the environment and society while securing the long-term future of our business. And we see these actions as more than just, table stakes. No, they are steps that truly create value for business, for industry, for people, and importantly for the planet. And, we understand that all companies are facing similar choices, regarding what's their climate strategy, How do they think about product sustainability? What's the environmental impact of their operations? And we hope that our efforts and efforts of companies like us encourage other companies to take similar steps so that together we can build a stronger, more sustainable food system for us all, because that's what we all really need.
Thank you so much. That's really important, and it's very um, encouraging to hear about PepsiCo's ambition that looks at water and food security and looking at sustainable production, as well as looking at changing consumer behavior through your sustainable practices. So, thank you so much for that response. Um, I would now like to come to Ashley of Oatly to look at the concept of planetary boundaries, specifically to our agriculture and land use resources. Ashley, how might sustainability in the agriculture and land use sector fit into a company's vision and goals?
Yeah, thank you, Divya. This is such a critical event because I think really the food sector is pretty underrepresented in this climate effort, in this climate emergency. And yet the food sector is responsible for nearly 1/3 of global emissions. Just think about that for a moment. I think that will surprise a lot of people. Um, to Jim's point about planetary boundaries, the food sector requires immense amounts of natural resources, like half the habitable land on the planet and the lion's share of fresh water. And it's also a tremendous driver of biodiversity loss. So we really are talking about many, many aspects of planetary health here, which of course is really linked to people's health. In short, the food system's broken, and it's really the responsibility of companies to fix that. For companies like ours, like PepsiCo, supply chains can make up to 90% of our carbon footprints for our entire scopes 1 through 3, 90%. And so that makes agriculture and land and those parts of the supply chain super critical to the effort to solve climate change. But I just want to make something clear. It's not okay just for companies to try to do less bad, to try to be less negative. If we're really talking about doing a positive thing for the planet, then all companies need to sort of rethink how they fit into the food system and really accelerate our transition toward a sustainable future. I'm not trying to say that it's easy, because it's not, but it really takes companies building sustainability into their business model, building those solutions into what they produce and how they interact with customers and consumers. And that's really how we can make change. So for Oatly, that's how we're approaching the issue. Our products can be a climate solution. And our mission is to make it easy for people to eat and drink what's good for them without recklessly taxing the planet's resources. Now, we've also set a suite of goals this year, and one of them is really to make the food system that we operate in, so Oatly's food system, give back to nature, give back to biodiversity, and be good for farmers, really improve farmers' lives. That means for Oatly, it's all about oats. It's all about oats and driving a plant-based revolution. So I think for each company, really taking a look at their full supply chain, their full scope, considering critically how agriculture fits into that scope, and then using that to drive where they're going to take transformative action in the agriculture and land sector. That's the only way that we can really solve climate change.
Thank you, Ashley. I think your point on influencing business model and accelerating and scaling up action is the key to the response towards food security and water systems. And thank you very much for being so precise in your response. We've now heard from two international business leaders, but we are also lucky to have a government leader with us as well. Mudit, I know that the state of Chhattisgarh in India is integrating land use, food systems, and climate resilience into their planning. Could you briefly describe Chhattisgarh's agriculture watershed and treatment of rivulets in a holistic manner plan?
For this opportunity. Well, let me begin with saying that today we face many existential threats and climate change is one of them. I recall a recent epitomic research on impact of 1987 Montreal Protocol on curbing chlorofluorocarbons, which postulates that without the 1987 CFC protocol, there would have been 580 billion fewer tons of carbon stored in forests, vegetation, and soil by 2100, and there would be an additional 165 to 215 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This study sets a tone to look for holistic approaches to mitigate climate change. I firmly believe that the answers to climate change lies amongst the community, the people of the country, state, town and villages. With this realization of exigencies of the multi-pronged impact of the climate change, the highest leadership in the state has proactively initiated a statewide project popularly known as Narva Garva Gurva Badi Project. Narva means streams and rivulets treatment. Gurva is household waste treatment. Garva is cattle management. And Badi is kitchen garden. The project embeds the governing principle of climate sensitivity to cater to the needs of rural masses. To survive the existential challenges ahead of us, we need to move from confronting climate to adapting to the climate. As of current financial year, more than 20,000 square kilometers of areas has been taken up for treatment on the principles of rich to valley treatment, and more than 200 billion soil and water conservation structures have been created by the State Forest Department and Rural Development Department. These structures are basically targeted to improve water and soil regime in the selected watershed areas. Then, to fight the malnutrition, kitchen gardens have been developed in the individual household level. Also, to ensure community participation, community cow shelters and buyback of cow dung and conversion to organic manure has been implemented in the state. The state of Chhattisgarh also plans to carry out a third party comprehensive impact assessment of the NGGB program using the satellite images and ground based observations, the result of which will help the administrators to further fine tune the NGGB implementation mechanism.
Thank you, Mudit. Thank you very much for that outline of the plan. And as a follow up to that question, could you also explain why this type of holistic approach to land use and climate change is necessary for an Indian state such as Chhattisgarh?
Sure, Divya, as we are becoming more and more aware that we are perilously close to a world which is going to change before our very own eyes. The key actionable activities of this NGGB project are part of the present livelihood and rural ecosystem. The program has been received well by the villagers, and 70% of our population in the country lives in the rural area, so it has a very mass following. The project like NGGB, with its community participation core, shall empower people to adapt to climate resilience and inculcate climate friendly and climate aware way of life. This is very important and is therefore worth replicating in other states in the country. Rather worryingly, climate change will impact the very root of how we choose to live. Thus, such scientifically informed choices of NGGB implementation shall go a long way to evolve a local specific climate resilience strategies. Chhattisgarh is predominantly forested state with 45% of the geographical area under forest cover. Hence, the tribal population, whose livelihood depends on forest and forest produce, tend to benefit from this innovative concept because origin of most of the water bodies is in the forest area. Besides the above, the percolation of moisture helps in regeneration of the flora and increase in water level in the ponds and wells in the adjoining areas for local daily use. The stall feeding of the cattle helps to check trampling of young seedlings by way of grazing in the forest, and conversion of cow dung manure into organic fertilizer decreases dependency on pesticides and chemicals in the farmlands besides cost saving. And pesticide banning is a global phenomena. So this is a very innovative approach which has come a long way in sustaining the livelihood strategies in the rural areas. And I'm sure all these efforts go a long way in reversing the adverse impact on human population and mitigate climate vagaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mudit. I think you've demonstrated in your response the merit in bringing in policies that have communities as central to climate action and resilience. Thinking about this holistic and systematic approach to food and climate change, I want to turn back to businesses. Jim, how does agriculture and our food system more broadly link into the broader challenges that society is facing today?
Yeah, thanks. They're a key part of those broader challenges. I mean, if you think about our global food system, rooted in agriculture, so addressing the complex challenges of agriculture can have profound impacts on the entire system. And as Moody said, agriculture presents one of the greatest opportunities to address climate change, biodiversity loss, and a vast array of societal issues. But as we all know, unfortunately, and Ashley shared a number of great facts, conventional agriculture has contributed to these challenges. And at the same time, every degree of warming is expected to reduce staple crop yields by 10%. So clearly, we need to think collectively very differently about how we grow the food that we need. Now, thankfully, regenerative agricultural practices are on the rise. These are practices like planting cover crops, which can improve the ability of soil to store carbon. Cover crops also have a number of other great advantages, controlling weeds, minimizing pests and diseases, improving water availability, and increasing biodiversity on the farm. But all of these approaches have to really start with farmers. And farmers need support at the local level. They need tools, they need resources, they need investment to help them adopt these regenerative practices that are going to improve soil health. And farmers are business people, and we need to never forget that. The economic piece is really critical. We can't expect farmers to change practices and thereby effectively take on more risk without considering that farming is how they make a living and provide for their families. And this is why at PepsiCo we developed our positive agriculture strategy. We've got clear goals to source crops and ingredients in a way that accelerates regenerative agriculture and strengthens farming communities. We're working to scale regenerative practices across 7 million acres by 2030, which is about the approximate size of our entire agricultural footprint globally. And we estimate that these efforts will eliminate at least 3 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions. And we've to improve the livelihoods of more than 250,000 people in our agricultural supply chain and the communities, including economically empowering women. And we're not doing this alone. We can't. We're doing this through a set of diverse partnerships with organizations like USAID and the National Black Horse Council, among others. If I were to try and sum it all up, Divya, and answer your question, at PepsiCo, we look at regenerative agriculture as a way you can create value for our business, value for the planet, and value for the hundreds of thousands of people that are working at the most foundational level of our global food system. And this is also a key way we all can help address some of society's biggest challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Regenerative agriculture practices present possibilities and potential for adaptation to climate change. And I like how you've linked it to communities and how you've linked it to even biodiversity conservation. And I'm glad you brought that point out. So thank you for your response. We are running short of time and have just one question left to link it all together. Ashley, to close, what is the role of local agricultural producers for a food company such as Oatly?
Well, I think it's clear with the conversation so far that really agriculture is local and that farmers are at the center of it. Not only are they on the front lines of climate change and really feeling the impacts directly every day all around the world, but they're also the champions of change. They're the ones that, with our support, are going to change their practices and really make that food system shift that we're striving for. Now, to really sort of ground this and just think about some specific examples, as Oatly has approached this space, we've really focused in on our key ingredient, oats. Oats is more than 80% of our volume of ingredients and makes up more than 50% of our carbon emissions. We're naturally a low emission company, but that means that every little thing counts, and oats really make up the bulk of it. So we've prioritized working with farmers to try to set up some of the regenerative and restorative systems that Jim talked about and that Madit mentioned is going on in India. One example, we've been working with a farmer named Adam in Sweden for a number of years now. And the thrust of that work wasn't just about scientific practices and climate change. It was really about developing that system that was going to work for Adam, that was going to bring more diversity to the farm and more income for him and his family and therefore the farm community. Through that work, Adam was able to produce 79% more calories for human consumption on his farm over the 4-year period that we worked together. And the greenhouse gas emissions per calorie for human consumption were then halved. So he sort of proved to us that this can be done, and this can be done in a way that benefits farmers. We've expanded that work. We're working with 10 more farmers in Sweden, and we've also started a similar project in the US with the Practical Farmers of Iowa and the Sustainable Food Lab, and are working with around 13 farmers there. So really, what we need to do to sort of make this local and make it real is companies need to get down and dirty and really work with farmers, work with communities in countries all over the world, and really show what these kinds of practices can do, show how regenerative and restorative agriculture can really be a climate solution.
Thank you, Ashley. And the will of big businesses such as yours, to work very closely at grassroots levels with farmers to bring up models that are not only sustainable, but they are healthy for the planet is really very encouraging. Thank you so much for your response. And also thank you to Jim and Mudit again, as well as our participants, for joining us today. That last answer also sets the stage for the next segment of our event, the Farm Side Chat. I would like now to pass it over to Dr. Jituni Oldada, Deputy Director at FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN, to lead that conversation. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Divya, and thank you everyone for joining our Farm Side Chat in the field knowledge on farming and food. I'm very pleased to be joined by Precious Theory, who's the founding director of Earth Wisdom Consulting Co. and steering committee member of Regeneration International. We're very pleased to have Precious with us to have this chat about in the field knowledge on farming and food. But let me just set the scene by putting some facts to frame our discussion today. We see the urgency of addressing climate change rising really around us with the latest floods in Europe, in the US, and in China, and also the latest IPCC report, which again reminded us of the urgency of addressing climate change. And agriculture in particular is highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change, but it is also a fundamental part of the solution. And overall, it is estimated that agriculture sector absorbs more than 26% of the total damage and loss from climate extreme events. And this loss and damage rises to more than 80% when they're caused by drought. And those who are most affected are the most vulnerable communities, particularly smallholder farmers. And there are about 500 million smallholder farmers around the world who are highly dependent on natural resources and agriculture. And for Africa, not only the population is expected to double by the year 2050, but also 70 to 80% of the smallholder farmers depend on agriculture. And in addition to that, almost 60% of Africans are under the age of 25, which provides a huge potential and incentive for the uptake of technology and innovation in the continent, particularly for farming. So my first question to you, Precious, and this is going to be a dialogue between us, how vulnerable is agriculture in Africa, and how can we make it part of the solution to climate crisis?
Hi, Zituni. Thank you so much for this opportunity and a critical question that you've asked me right there. First of all, I think, as you've rightly said, that Africa is really anchored by smallholder farmers. They take care of about 80% of food needs in the African continent. And this rings true in most of the global south regions anyway. So when we talk about agriculture in Africa, it brings a lot of unsettlement to, especially being a woman in the front lines of working with farmers on a daily on the land. First of all, the landscape right now in Africa, things have been evolving and the landscapes are very vulnerable. Literally, the weather conditions, you can have very arid to extreme wet weather conditions. So in a good rain and in a bad rain year, you can have droughts or failed cropping. So most African women and children and men, I mean, everyone is really being affected negatively by the climatic weather events. The other vulnerability has been maybe slow technological movements or access, because I think that farmers have lots of innovations that they come up with, especially in the agroecological front lines. There's lots of networks and groups that are encouraging farmers to actually take up, what we've known culturally to work in agriculture, working or pastoral farming. We have always had ways as Africans of making our agriculture productive, but as things have evolved, we've learned some skills along the way. But thankfully, technology is advancing, but then some access can be an issue. Access to information, access to those groups that are in the front lines, like women, youths. And I think the other vulnerability is also in the absence of youths that really aspire to be in the front lines of changing the trajectory of agriculture. And I think if technology and information is really passed on in a skillful that will attract also the youths to step it up and take sort of the baton from the older women and men that are in farming. I wanted to shed, I don't know if that's still okay, I wanted to shed a bit of hope to say there's lots of incredible networks that are dealing with hundreds of thousands of farmer groups in the whole Pan-African region. We have AFSA, which is Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, that are passing on intensively information so that farmers can learn across from one another, and sometimes we go even across the region of Africa so that we learn from others who are doing the same work or maybe face the same situations as us. In my work personally, I work with farmers using a decision-making framework called holistic management for farmers to really understand what we call eco-literacy. So to understand your region where you're farming, that decision-making tool to help you know what sort of practices are applicable to your bioregion for your success and also resilience. And I think when you look at agroecology, agriculture, permaculture, and all those good practices, farmers have to understand their environment first before they actually apply them. I think in brief, that's what I would have to share for now.
No, that's very helpful, and you mentioned so many issues there. Let me pick up on one you mentioned about access to information, to knowledge, to technology. So how can we accelerate the access of these means of putting, these practices in the field, as you mentioned. You gave some examples, but obviously is not enough. How can we make other communities and farmers benefit from the knowledge and technology that you mentioned?
Yeah, so that's such a critical and also very dicey question, given that most African smallholder farmers that I'm speaking about are in areas that do not have great internet access, which in these times it's unfortunate. With the pandemic on its own, it's very difficult for people to group and meet and learn on a physical scale. If we could have innovation and technology come into spaces of making access to information less data needing technological things, where people can access very quick information that is not very complicated, because also we're looking at literacy in terms of reading and writing in some instances is very limited. But if we could have less demanding or less weighty technologies that could help pass on translated information, translated especially stories of success, stories of videos, and in each region, I think players or stakeholders like us who work with farmers on a daily, we care about how to bring those small groups together to learn, for example, from a 5-minute video from Uganda, if you are in Zimbabwe, or a 5-minute video from India, for example, where others are doing like natural farming. So I think we need that less intense technology to have information easily accessible and very light information, so that people can relate to it depending on their needs.
Yes, and you're right. I mean, the exchange of information and lessons between farms and between countries is so important. And I wonder how much is that happening really. Taking the example of Africa, and just to give you one example, in FAO, we have a new initiative called the Hand in Hand initiative, where actually we want developing nations to work together and share the experiences and best practices. And this obviously applies to farmers as well. So from what you said, how you see the importance of countries and regions in Africa exchanging information between each other and collaborating in this area?
So that, I think that is the essence of a successful agricultural future. Literally, the world is working together, and there's lots of lessons that can be tapped from each region. So generally, we know that every person has something to share, and there is no looking down upon cultures and how they have evolved with their agricultural practices and food systems, and what are those things that hold their essence in them about food, and not to say that we need to do copy and paste, because I think we're in trouble because we've copied and not necessarily followed principles. I think when the essence of sharing is so that you follow and listen intently on the principles that have made someone who they are, and then you look in your own zone and your own region and understand issues at play in my region, and what would sort of make me successful in my region and zone, like my neighbor. And in Africa, in the spirit of Ubuntu, that speaks to an abundant mindset. The issue of sharing is about generosity and abundance. And sharing can be good, it can be even knowledge and what has worked and what hasn't, so that we don't reinvent the wheel or go through the same mistakes that others have gone through. I think that would save us a lot. But in effect, advance innovation. Yeah.
No, thank you very much. I wish we had more time to talk about some of the important point that you raised, but this has been really great. Thank you. Just to finish, what is just one key point or key message you want to pass on to colleagues listening to us?
So, apparent in my everyday work and working with communities, it's been this idea of bringing before the possibilities if we really took on the idea that we are also part of the solution as the human species. So we are part of the solution and we have information to share and we think from an abundant mindset and never a scarcity. When we look at our land, we look at it with love. We are not extractive, but we keep planting back so that the giving cycle continues between us, our land, all lived a thriving food system into the future.
Right. Great. Well, thank you very much. For me, the takeaway based on what you said is that each one of us has also a part to play in addressing climate change. So we will all have to take responsibility and act responsibly. So thanks very much, Precious, and thank you to everyone who joined us at this chat. We'll now move on from Africa to listen into our colleagues all the way over in the Amazon region. So I'm very pleased to hand over to Kurt Hall, who's the Director of Peru for WWF. Kurt, over to you.
Gracias, Situni, y gracias por estar con nosotros hoy, Carolina y Jaime y el gobernador Hidalgo, que se unirá por video grabado. Para conversar sobre cambio climático, uso de tierras y agricultura en Latinoamérica, hemos convocado a un panel esencialmente amazónico. Un lujo. Ustedes representan regiones distintas de la Amazonía. Los panelistas que tenemos representan regiones distintas de la Amazonía y también perspectivas de distintos sectores que trabajan en estas regiones distintas de la Amazonía. Y por eso quisiera empezar por los desafíos que son distintos en cada región y desde la perspectiva de cada sector. Entonces, la primera pregunta tiene que ver con desafíos y la primera pregunta es para Jaime, para Pastaza, Ecuador. Y Jaime, ¿cuáles son los mayores retos para ustedes en relación al uso de tierras y cambio climático?
Un atento saludo a los amigos que nos siguen a través de este espacio tan importante. Lo que les decimos, nosotros estamos en Sudamérica, Ecuador, y aquí nosotros tenemos parte de las 24 provincias es Pastaza, la provincia más grande del país, con 29.644 kilómetros. Les decimos de manera muy práctica, nosotros tenemos 2 parques nacionales. El Parque Nacional Yanganates, que nos da el límite con la Sierra Ecuatoriana, y tenemos nosotros también, es el Parque Nacional Yasuní, en pleno centro de la Amazonía. Nosotros tenemos una exuberante selva que nos conjuga la naturaleza, nos conjuga la fauna, como también tenemos que decir 7 de las 14 nacionalidades que tiene mi país: los quichuas, los shuar, los achuar, los guagrani, los záparos, los xibier, los andoas. Como tal, nosotros debemos indicar, amigos, que la provincia está identificada y está en el ámbito que tenemos agricultura, tenemos el tema de lo que habitualmente es la ganadería, la piscicultura, el tema urbanístico, el tema de explotación de madera. Todas estas actividades hacen presión para el tema de perder el bosque y tener influencia en el cambio climático. Nosotros, como tal, estamos afrontando este reto como gobierno provincial de Pastaza de manera eficiente, equitativa, racionalizada. ¿Con qué? Aprovechando el tema del suelo, tanto urbano como rural. ¿Y qué estamos indicando? Queremos hábitat seguro para los hombres y mujeres que viven en este entorno de mi querido país y mi querida provincia. Como tal, les decimos, nosotros hacemos una explotación de aprovechamiento sostenible de los recursos naturales, en lo que nos permita decir de manera armónica, vivir de manera planificada. ¿Qué hemos hecho nosotros? Tenemos 3 zonas planificadas. Tenemos la zona de asentamientos humanos, donde está la mayor población. Segundo, tenemos la zona de transición. Y tercero, tenemos una zona conservada. Con estos espacios, nosotros, ¿qué hemos desarrollado? Hemos desarrollado espacios de 4 ejes multimodales. ¿Qué significa esto? Que nosotros conservamos la naturaleza y vamos por la bondad que tienen nuestros ríos. ¿Qué es lo que buscamos? Hacer una convivencia armónica con respeto a nuestras nacionalidades y una agricultura sostenible, pero con respeto al equilibrio de la naturaleza. Entonces, como tal, esto es lo que nosotros hacemos en mi querida provincia de Pastaza, que les da el saludo reverente y decimos, aquí estamos para dar nuestra experiencia a los buenos amigos que nos siguen a través de este medio tecnológico.
Muchas gracias, Jaime. Se nota el rol central de áreas protegidas y de territorios indígenas en Pastaza y el enfoque de ustedes a partir de las zonificaciones como zonas intervenidas, zonas transicionales, las áreas de protección de flora y fauna que ha mencionado. Viene un enfoque basado en conservación de naturaleza y en sostenibilidad. Ahora cambiamos un poquito la perspectiva a otra geografía, la geografía de Brasil y a la perspectiva de una ONG. Carolina, ¿cuáles obstáculos, cuáles desafíos ven ustedes como World Resources Institute en la región amazónica del lado brasileño?
Olá a todos, é um prazer estar aqui representando a WRI Brasil e a concertação pela Amazônia. Os desafios que a gente vê, Kurt, são muito em relação ao bioma como um todo, né? Não só aquele que está no Brasil, mas também o bioma amazônico que está no Brasil, mas também nos nossos países vizinhos. Nós entendemos que a floresta amazônica é de essencial importância para se controlar o clima do planeta, para nos ajudar a manter o aumento da temperatura média abaixo de 1,5 ou 2 graus centígrados comparados às temperaturas pré-industriais. Mas existem 4 importantes desafios e desafios urgentes. O primeiro é que a floresta sempre foi conhecida por ser um sumidouro de carbono, ou seja, ela é capaz de tirar carbono da atmosfera. Hoje ela começa a ser um emissor de carbono, principalmente no sudeste da Amazônia, localizada no Brasil. Então, isso é motivo de grande preocupação. A segunda é que a Amazônia hospeda grande parte da biodiversidade do planeta. 10% da biodiversidade do planeta está ali. E nós estamos perdendo essa biodiversidade de maneira extremamente rápida e irreversível. Isso terá consequências. Nós temos que parar essa crise de perda em massa de biodiversidade. A terceira situação que também nos preocupa em relação à saúde da floresta é a possibilidade de savanização. Estudos mostram que a Amazônia tem o risco de deixar de ser uma floresta tropical e passar pelo tipping point, o ponto de não retorno, de começar a ser seca ao ponto de se savanizar. Os cientistas acreditam que isso pode acontecer em torno de quando a floresta perder 25% da sua cobertura total. Nós hoje já perdemos 20%. Então estamos muito próximos desse número, e é um número que a gente não quer pagar para ver, né? Então a gente precisa reflorestar, a gente precisa começar a recuperar a floresta e ter certeza que ela não está perdendo biodiversidade, cobertura florestal, e que se mantém uma floresta em pé e saudável. Por último, a floresta amazônica não é uma floresta intacta, existem pessoas morando ali, existem cidades, porém esse desenvolvimento econômico que aconteceu dentro da floresta veio com muita desigualdade e pobreza. Então é preciso também, quando a gente pensa num novo modelo de desenvolvimento para a Amazônia, principalmente um novo modelo de desenvolvimento econômico, é necessário trazer respostas rápidas que permitam aumentar a qualidade de vida das pessoas que ali vivem, dar trabalhos dignos, não ligados a mercados informais ou ilegais, e principalmente ser capaz de tirar as pessoas de situação de pobreza.
Gracias, Carolina. Cabe destacar que muchas de las amenazas que mencionaste, el hecho de que la Amazonía se convierta en emisor o la sabanización de la Amazonía son amenazas interconectadas, ¿no? Entonces estas 3 o 4 temas de riesgo no hay que verlos como 4 temas encasillados, sino en realidad están interconectados, ¿no? Y eso los hace aún más riesgosos. También le pedimos al gobernador de Madre de Dios, al gobernador Luis Hidalgo, hablar sobre los desafíos y la visión de su región. Y nos envió este video con un mensaje desde la linda ciudad de Puerto Maldonado, que vamos a mostrar ahora.
En nuestro territorio las actividades económicas que más emiten gases de efecto invernadero están relacionados con el sector agricultura, ganadería, silvicultura y otros usos de la tierra, AFOLU por sus siglas en inglés, pues como lo demuestran los estudios realizados, se proyectó que para el 2030 estas emisiones alcanzarían 17.5 millones de toneladas métricas de dióxido de carbono equivalente. Esta situación nos compromete cumplir con metas de descarbonización efectivas, ambiciosas y transformadoras e implementar acciones prioritarias para alcanzar logros significativos en nuestro territorio. Por ello, estamos asumiendo el compromiso de reducir el 26% de las emisiones para el 2030 y el 66% de reducción de emisiones para el 2050. Para lograr eso, hemos incluido 11 acciones prioritarias en la trayectoria de Madre de Dios, todas en el sector agricultura, ganadería, silvicultura y otros usos de la tierra. Estas acciones son las siguientes: mecanismos de conservación en bosques de comunidades nativas y manejo forestal comunitario, aumento de la productividad y eficiencia de las actividades agrícolas, aumento de la productividad y eficiencia de las actividades ganaderas, plantaciones forestales con fines de protección y restauración, plantaciones forestales comerciales, promoviendo la participación de los actores en la gestión de las áreas naturales protegidas y bosques locales, sistemas agroforestales para recuperación de áreas degradadas, reducción del riesgo de incendios forestales, reducción de la conversión de tierras forestales a áreas mineras, programa de lucha contra la tala ilegal, manejo forestal sostenible de concesiones forestales maderables. La implementación de las acciones prioritarias generan costos netos a lo largo del tiempo que dependen de las nuevas prácticas, programas, tecnologías e infraestructura que minimicen la deforestación y permitan un desarrollo territorial sostenible, así como los sistemas de pagos directos que se podrían implementar. Como gobierno regional, venimos trabajando en implementar un modelo de desarrollo ambientalmente sostenible, económicamente competitivo e inclusivo socialmente. Nuestro enfoque es la especialización inteligente del territorio, aprovechando nuestros valiosos recursos naturales de la biodiversidad mediante la industrialización de los sectores económicos estratégicos, basada en la innovación científica y transformación tecnológica. Así, el enfoque clave es producir, proteger e incluir, impulsando actividades económicas con tecnologías limpias, sin deforestación y mitigando las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero. Para ello, nuestros instrumentos técnicos y normativos desarrollados por el Gobierno regional son la Estrategia Regional de Desarrollo Rural Bajo en Emisiones, la Trayectoria de Descarbonización, la Estrategia Regional de Cambio Climático y el desarrollo de la marca territorial Madre de Dios, instrumentos que actualmente se vienen incorporando en la actualización del Plan de Desarrollo Regional Concertado al 2030, que constituye el instrumento rector para el desarrollo del territorio.
Gracias al gobernador Luis Hidalgo de Madre de Dios por enviarnos esta intervención. Rescato una frase, su mensaje: producir, proteger e incluir. Y también rescato las metas ambiciosas del gobierno de Madre de Dios. Reducir la deforestación en 26% para el 2030 y en 66% para el 2050. Volvamos a nuestros panelistas acá presentes. Jaime, regresando a usted. ¿Cuál es la visión para la naturaleza y para la provincia y la agricultura del Pastaza? ¿Cuáles son las herramientas, instrumentos que emplearán para lograr esta visión?
Bueno, realmente, escuchando a los compañeros panelistas, vivimos en la Amazonía, pero es tan dispersa y tan distinta. Nosotros decimos de manera práctica, tenemos una visión muy clara, muy concreta, de contribuir a la conservación y sostener todo el hábitat que está con nosotros. Y decimos de manera práctica, concreta, que nosotros queremos vivir en un ambiente sano, y lo que nosotros buscamos de manera práctica es que esta provincia, la más grande del país, tiene 11 ecosistemas y nosotros tenemos el 59% del territorio está conservada bajo distintos espacios de normativa legal que los regula el Ministerio del Ambiente y Agua del Ecuador. Nosotros como tal, como gobierno provincial, tenemos un norte claro a donde poder trabajar. Para los amigos que nos escuchan y nos siguen, nosotros somos un gobierno subnacional, las prefecturas. En este caso práctico, nosotros gestionamos el territorio y tenemos que decir, nuestra intervención se basa en temas prácticos en los que buscamos una alianza concreta entre lo público, entre lo privado, pero que debamos dar un estricto cumplimiento a la normativa que nos regula al Ecuador. Y como tal tenemos 7 actividades prácticas que venimos desarrollando. Entre lo que tenemos, hay un plan de desarrollo de ordenamiento territorial que fue el primero de las 23 provincias que tienen este régimen. Nosotros tenemos la primera en presentar el PDOT, alineado a las ODS, los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible. Nos alineamos a -1, porque no tenemos salidas al mar. Segundo elemento, nosotros tenemos el plan de implementación Red Más, aprobado por el Ministerio del Ambiente y Agua del Ecuador, que es el primero entre los gobiernos subnacionales. No hay otra propuesta de aquellos. Tercero, nosotros tenemos el primer plan de educación ambiental potenciado al 2025 con la participación de Planifica Ecuador. Esto quiere decir para todos los segmentos que haya una educación sostenible, y es la primera de la Amazonía. Tenemos una agenda forestal sostenible, tenemos un plan de gestión, tenemos una ordenanza que también nos da las políticas ambientales que regulamos para nuestra provincia, que abarca 4 cantones y que abarca también 17 parroquias. Y tenemos la ordenanza de creación del área ecológica para el desarrollo sostenible. Esto quiere decir que es el primer ejercicio como gobierno subnacional que nos permite decir, amigos, un tema de cúmulo de espacios, poder llegar a presentarnos ante usted con una propuesta que irradiar para el resto de la Amazonía, especialmente de la parte alta, que corresponde a todos estos países nuestros, entre lo que es Perú, lo que es Ecuador y lo que es Colombia.
Queda claro que el Pastaza, desde, ya sea por la cantidad de área que tiene bajo algún tipo de protección legal, creo que mencionó 59%, y también queda claro por la cantidad de planes, instrumentos ligados a medio ambiente que mencionó, sean planes de producción sostenible, planes de educación ambiental, de gestión ambiental, de Red Plus, de forestal sostenible, etcétera. Queda claro que hay un compromiso y una visión de sostenibilidad y de mantener la naturaleza en el gobierno de Pastaza, ¿no? Pasando a Carolina nuevamente, regresando a Carolina y cambiando de perspectiva, Carolina, cuéntanos qué es la concertación, la Red para la Concertación por la Amazonía, y cuál es su visión para la región.
Justo. A Concertação pela Amazônia, Kurt e demais, é um movimento que juntou 200 lideranças entre pessoas, instituições, sociedade civil, setor privado, de todas as partes do Brasil, mas que estão preocupadas com o futuro da Amazônia. Então, são 200 brasileiros, vamos dizer, em ação, pensando soluções, dialogando sobre o que deveria ser, o que poderia ser um movimento e um plano de desenvolvimento sustentável para a Amazônia, que seja capaz de preservar a floresta em pé, né, manter a sua produção de alimentos também nas áreas antropizadas, mas principalmente permita chegar na região saneamento, educação, infraestrutura necessária, básica para todos que ali moram, uma economia resiliente às questões climáticas. E essa visão que a concertação tem para a Amazônia, ela passa por 5 linhas de ação. Tem a economia, a infraestrutura, financiamento, ordenamento territorial. A gente entende que essas são linhas de trabalho que precisam ser cuidadas para que a gente tenha a capacidade real de pensar um uso diferente e digno para esse recurso natural incrível que nós temos e que compartilhamos com os nossos vizinhos.
Muchas gracias, Carolina. Se me ocurre que es necesario, para mantener ese tejido conectivo entre 200 socios brasileños y tan diversos, socios tan diversos, se me ocurre que es necesario mucha energía humana, mucho sudor, ¿no? Para mantener todos esos socios conversando. Es exactamente lo que hay que hacer para implementar el tipo de visiones que hemos escuchado de parte del gobierno de Madre de Dios o de Pastaza y para Brasil también, ¿no? Y sobre todo mantener esa red de actores comunicados en un área logística y comunicacionalmente tan complicada como la Amazonía es todo un reto, ¿no? Y ahí no me imagino en realidad la cantidad de energía que le dedican a eso. Bueno, ese fue todo el tiempo que tenemos. Muchas gracias por estar acá con nosotros en esta conversación tan relevante para nuestra época. Sigamos explorando distintas formas de enfrentar los retos de cambio climático desde nuestras diferentes regiones, desde nuestros diferentes sectores. Y con eso me despido, agradeciéndoles a ustedes, nuestros distinguidos panelistas, por sus palabras y sus ideas y su tiempo, y a la audiencia por el tiempo y la atención dedicada. Y le dejo la palabra de cierre a Tim de Climate Group. Gracias.
Thank you, Kurt. We've covered quite quickly many topics here today, starting from the broader concept of planetary boundaries, moving to discussing how businesses can not only do less bad, as Ashley put it, but actually work towards climate positive operations, and then working our way over to the impact that local farmers and communities can have in terms of fighting climate change, but also in terms of protecting nature, water resources, biodiversity, and regional food security. Because as we know, all of these topics are very much interrelated. I think one takeaway I would like to make note of from the event today is just the urgency and the need for all of us to promote and support the transformation of our food systems away from the destructive, conventional farming approaches towards regenerative and restorative agricultural principles, which include protecting nature, biodiversity, and local communities. And as Precious noted in the farm side chat, it's also key that we approach the system level change not from the negative perspective of scarcity, but from the positive mindset of embracing abundance, while entrusting our farmers and local communities with the role of stewardship over the land. We're very happy to host this event as the Under2 Coalition Secretariat and the Climate Group as we look forward to expanding our work within the food and land use systems. We're already supporting one project on silvipastoral systems and farmer field schools together with the government of Madre de Dios in Peru with WWF, both of whom you've just heard from. So keep an eye out for updates on that project as it develops. We'd be very happy to hear from any of the attendees here today who'd like to get in touch about developing work together in the future. A colleague of mine will leave her contact details in the chat. And finally, I hope that everyone watching at home here enjoyed the events. Thanks so much to our speakers and to our moderators. We were very happy to have you join us here at Climate Week New York City. And thanks as well to the whole event team and of course to all of those who are watching. Goodbye.